Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
So Storm Frank is tonight sweeping across the Atlantic, bound for the northwest of the UK, bringing fresh downpours to already saturated areas. Further east, the city of York has suffered its worst flooding in a generation, and many residents are waiting for insurance assessors to arrive before they can pick up the pieces of their lives. Paul McNamara is in York this evening. Paul, how's it looking there?
Well, scenes in York at the moment are a lot less dramatic than they have been over the past couple of days. But as one lady told me today, when those dramatic scenes end, that's when the people who live here actually discover the true scale of their losses. And the destruction is vast and far from over. I mean, just in the last hour, we've heard that an ancient bridge up in Tadcaster in North Yorkshire has collapsed. That's only going to add to the difficulties of driving anywhere around here. Now, if the ruin that we've seen already is bad, what's worse is we have no idea what's to come. As you've said, another storm is about to hit us. No one knows what effect it's going to have. No one knows how many more homes will be flooded. And families who have already been flooded have no idea if they're going to be flooded again. After the last few days, you'd hope the worst would be over. It's actually just the calm before the storm. Storm Frank. Tonight and tomorrow, fresh floods will hit Cumbria and Yorkshire. But here in York, most are only just starting to count the cost of the storms they've already seen.
So the kitchen was complete, you had the appliances,
yeah,
you come in on Boxing Day, where were the appliances?
Just floating around in the room behind you, which now they're outside, hopefully going to dry out.
What are the chances of that?
Not very slim.
James bought this riverside house just a few months ago. He's been turning the basement into a holiday flat to let out.
Are you insured for this?
No, we're not.
So how much do you think this would have cost you?
Well, me and my wife have estimated we've probably spent somewhere about 15,000 doing the basement up.
Yeah.
If not more than that, because with my labour and time as well.
Yeah.
So it's probably going to be another 15,000 to redo it all. When we bought this place, we knew there was. I've lived in York for quite a few years, and we knew the flood defence systems were there. So why did they have to open them? I can't see. There's a big design fault in the flood defences. If the electrics are going to get flooded, they have to open the floodgates.
This is the flood defence James is angry about. The Foss barrier, where the River Foss meets the River Ouse. When storms hit, a vast engine pumps water from one river to the other. But on Boxing Day, that pump broke. The Environment Agency say they had to raise the barrier, sending water coursing through the city streets.
With the Foss barrier clearly being as important as it is, how do you get to a state where you only find out when the heavy waters come that all of a sudden you're likely to be flooded, it's not going to work as it should be? How do we actually get to that point?
I think the Foss barrier is obviously really important to York, and it was built in 1987. It's done its job a number of times since then in protecting the city. We just haven't seen levels like we've seen on the River Foss over the last few days before, and they were so high that they entered the pump room, and it was that water that damaged the pumps.
But it's not as high as it has been in the past. 2000 it hit 20 centimetres higher than it has been this time round, is that right?
We've not seen the issue where it's been entering the pump room before. We've not had this issue, it's never happened.
Whatever the reason, that decision has had a massive effect on homes and businesses.
This is Jorvik Viking Centre. It's meant to be full of tourists right now, but instead it's full of, well, you can see what it's full of. Tourism is central to York's economy. And every day, because of these floods, businesses are losing out on millions of pounds. And that loss is echoed across the country.
In York, the Army are helping door to door. In Lancashire, the RAF are shoring up flood defences for what might come tonight as Storm Frank pounds the north. 6,500 homes have been flooded so far. That number could be much higher by tomorrow.
A huge amount is going on. We've got the Army at Preston, we've got the Army at Cashrick, we've got about 90% of all the available emergency assets in the Environment Agency up here in the north at the moment. I'm heading now back over to Cumbria, ready for that rain that's coming in. It's very unpredictable though, that's the problem. So I'm heading to Cumbria because at the moment it looks like the likelihood is the rain will fall on Cumbria, but that could change with 12 hours, in which case we could find ourselves coming back here.
For now, some are just trying to make the best of a bad situation.
So as the clear-up begins in York and elsewhere, the focus will turn to the cost of this latest round of flooding and who pays for it all. Well, our business correspondent Helia Ebrahimi has been doing the sums, and you've come up with a pretty hefty figure, haven't you?
Well, look, the financial cost for these ongoing floods is massive for homeowners, for insurers, for the taxpayer, for the thousands of businesses who are struggling to operate. And today, KPMG, the accountancy firm, estimated that if you tot it all up, you could see a bill for the UK going up to £5.8 billion. Now, we won't know officially for a few months how much it's going to be, but if we just look at the KPMG number, the biggest proportion of that is in insurance claims, £1.5 to £2.3 billion. But there are other things as well. The cost for local authorities in rebuilding bridges and roads, the cost to our premiums going up, and there's also an extra £1 billion in damages for things that aren't covered by insurance at all. Now, that's going to be very tough for households. And think in the UK, 1 in 6 homes are at risk of flooding. So in April, if you go forward, the government and insurance companies are setting up this fund, Flood Re, that will stop you from ending up in an uninsurable postcode and then getting hit by floods. But people in York and Cumbria are going to be thinking that's too little too late, especially in light of the fact that the government has been so heavily criticised about cutting the budget.
And of course, it's heartbreaking for householders affected, but it's concerning businesses as well, isn't it?
Look, it's a massive deal for businesses. The Federation of Small Businesses today, stark warning, 50,000 companies in the UK have been refused insurance cover altogether. They want to see another kind of fund like Flood Re set up for companies. We've got a Chancellor and a Prime Minister who are heavily promoting always this so-called Northern Powerhouse. But that's no use, Kathy, if all the businesses are under 2 foot of water.
Indeed. Helia, thank you very much. Well, joining me now from York is Chris Stewart, the Conservative leader of York City Council. Chris, tell me first, do you think that government spending cuts have made your city and beyond any more vulnerable to floods?
No, I don't think so. I mean, the problems we've seen in York this year are particular to the Foss barrier, the extent of the rain we've had, and then the barrier not being deployed due to technical problems. I think when David Cameron was in York yesterday, he was at pains to point out that flood spending has actually increased, and there's actually more spending in the north than the south.
Well, I would dispute those figures, because if you look at the fact that flood spending is going to go down during this Parliament, but also just to quote the head of Yorkshire Regional Flood and Coastal Committee, who warned the government just weeks ago that the cuts could mean discontinuing some flood defences. Do you not accept that it might have been better for some extra spending on flood defences than we've seen?
Well, we've not got anything in York that we've asked for and not achieved. In terms of the particular floods now, where we're very focused on dealing with the here and now, we asked for more army, we got that. We asked for more sandbags, we've got that. And the government's been very clear on funding, that it will be available. The conversations with the ministers have been very positive. So no, I don't think so. And I think we need to look at everything we can learn, but that's a time for a few weeks from now, rather than at the current time where we're dealing with the clear-up still.
So you're entirely happy that the last Conservative-led government cut capital spending on flood defences by nearly 30%, are you? And that hundreds of proposed flood defences got cancelled. You're happy with that, are you?
Well, I don't think it is the time to go into those sort of issues now, but the last government came into power with a deficit across the country of £175 billion, and so we had to make cuts. There had to be choices made. We as a country were living beyond our means.
Do you think there is a north-south divide, though, that you've got these state-of-the-art flood defences in the capital, for example, less so, maybe you're happy in York, but elsewhere up north?
Well, it's certainly not the case. I can only speak for York, but if we look at areas of York like Lehman Road, where we've just got new defences in the last 2 or 3 years, which meant houses that would have ordinarily been flooded in this sort of event had nothing at all, with the exception of a few people that slightly worried. So we're in a far better place. There's always more spending that we can have, and again, that's something that the government is receptive to listening to. They've made it clear that money is not the issue when it comes to the flood defences.
So you don't want overseas aids, for example, to be diverted to flood spending across the country?
Well, overseas aid is an entirely separate matter, I think, and we can afford what we're spending on overseas aid and we can afford what we're spending on flood defences. But again, it's really about, as councils, we have to look at what we can influence. That is the practicalities of dealing with the floods, the absolutely superb efforts of the emergency services, the Army and Mountain Rescue, rather than us getting involved in a political game as some people would like to.
Chris Stewart, thank you very much for joining me. Well,
I've been getting